have made lunch an hour, since we're starting an hour later. Well, our morning session was outstanding, and again, I want to express my appreciation to members of the public that are here, of course, the members of the committee, for the dialogue. As members of the public may not know, we like to operate this more as a workshop format where it's interactive and people can chime in at any time. It's just a better way of getting things done, at least as we're moving forward. Also want to just note for the record, I think every member of the committee was given a letter from the Transportation Agency for Monterey County. I know that Debbie Hale, the executive director, is here. I think I saw her someplace.
She stepped out.
Oh, she just stepped out. So I believe this will be part of our official record as well. And that's right, Will did reference it. So with that, let's move to Shen, and she's going to give us the item 8, the organizational design features in the pilot. And again, don't hesitate, members of the audience, to ask if there's any questions. Item 8 is an informational item. There's no action needed on it, but Shannon, go right ahead.
Thank you very much. So now that we've pretty much beat the operational concepts and technologies into the ground, discussing those, and we will continue to come back and revisit them. We want to talk about 2 topics in particular about how those concepts and technologies might fit into an organizational design for the pilot program. And so there are 2 really big topics that I want to spend just a couple of minutes discussing. I think we have 30 minutes set aside for this. I don't want to talk at you for 30 minutes, so I'm going to talk for 5, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion about it and address some of your questions. The 2 topics are how to approach interoperability with other states' road charging systems, and then also what a multiple account manager model might look like. And these will come back a little bit later on today when we kind of make the decision about whether we want to pursue testing interoperability with other states during the pilot, and also whether we want to pursue using a multiple account manager model during the pilot. So as far as interoperability goes, I put up a quick definition for someone who couldn't just roll off their tongue what interoperability means. It's essentially the ability of different systems and software applications to communicate with one another, to exchange data, and to use the information that has been exchanged. It doesn't mean that every state has to use the same technology. It doesn't mean that every state has to use the same operational concepts. And it doesn't mean that a single toll transponder company or single GPS company or single dongle manufacturer corners the market. It just means that there's an agreed upon set of communications protocols that states can use to share a reasonable amount of information so that funding is divvied up and allocated based on where the miles were actually consumed or driven rather than where gas was purchased or fuel was purchased. So what interoperability means from the motorist perspective is that I can pick my concept when I go to register my car or buy my car, and I can use that single concept to record and report miles regardless of where I'm driving. And I don't have to flip any switches. I don't have to necessarily register in the other state if I'm using one of the location-based systems. I don't have to switch service providers or account providers, and I don't have to do any kind of manual intervention. And as a fundamentally lazy person, I like that idea. I make my decision once, and as long as I'm paying my bills on time, I don't have to do anything. Something happens in the background. From the state's perspective, what interoperability provides is the mechanism for assessing road charge on out-of-state drivers. So folks who live in Washington or Oregon or Nevada or Maine, for that matter, if they drive into California, you can know that they were here, although you probably wouldn't know that. Somebody would know that, and assess the road charge on that person so that they're paying for the road that they consume. As far as the demonstration goes, you could recruit participants from one of the states that has an active pilot underway. And as Matthew already mentioned, Oregon is beginning to recruit participants. They'll go live in July. Colorado is considering a pilot. Washington is fairly far down the road to developing a pilot or watching legislation that's happening right now. Could be active during the time frame of your pilot. But I want to point out that it is possible to test it or to simulate interoperability during the pilot without having another state with an active system. So don't let the concern that Washington or Oregon or Maine may not be active. I'm picking on Maine today, I don't know why. I do know why. I was driving to the airport yesterday and there was a car from Maine and Texas, and I thought, that's a long drive. So don't let the thought that there might not be an active program somewhere else in the country underway dissuade you from thinking about testing this idea, because there are very good ways to simulate that through the course of the pilot. It could just be recruiting people from other states who are coming into the state and having one of the account managers or the account manager, just depending on the direction you want to go, pretend they have two different, that they're registered somewhere else. So it's all sort of a back office activity and simple enough to simulate. The requirements for interoperability really boil down to establishing a set of common data elements that can be shared. This is where a certain amount of discussion about privacy is going to come into play. The question becomes, how much personal information should be shared between states? The model that I like best for this really has to do with somebody has a location-based device, they're registered in their home state, the location-based device aggregates the miles that they drive in a different state, and then the home state sends a message back to California saying, hey, I've got a guy who's registered in Arizona, but he drove 200 miles in California, so we're going to collect his RUC at the California rate for those 200 miles and then transmit those funds back to you. And there would be a clearinghouse of some sort that would facilitate that transmittal between states. There are lots of different ways that it could happen, though. The key for this part of it, for the interoperability part of it, is just agreeing on what those common data elements are that are collected and the format that they would be shared between states. And the common data elements are things like probably a VIN or a license plate, total mileage driven, whether it's calculated from an odometer or whether it's calculated from GPS. And that's actually probably about it. And so that advanced agreement has to be there. That is the end of interoperability. I see furrowed brows, and I don't know whether that's the carb load hitting from lunch or questions or comments.
Did you say something? Actually, it makes sense. Is there any questions, comments from anybody on the interoperability? You said you were going to be short.
I keep my promises.
Yeah.
What I will say is that one of the worst things that I think that you could do, it's not my job to tell you what's good and what's bad, but it would be a shame to see you set up a really good system that stops at the border and doesn't talk to systems that are set up in the rest of the country. And so there's an opportunity here to take a real leadership role and say, not only are we setting up this system, but we want to set up a system that is interoperable with other systems and start the conversation on what the standards look like, what that data looks like, how the protections are built into that, what gets shared with whom and how. And I think that would be a really exciting thing.
Well, if I could just add, Norma, I don't think I could have said that better. Having interoperability, and this is the whole idea of this Western States Alliance, I would imagine, is to try to make sure that we're not all doing our own thing, much to the comment the supervisor made earlier, where you have different companies with different, transponders depending on where you are. And, obviously that didn't work too well. I don't want to be part of something that's going to just repeat that again to where California is an island unto itself. It doesn't make sense. So I would hope that the idea in the demonstration, if there's some folks from Oregon that would want to participate, it would be really a good exercise to see how that works. As Matt was indicating in his comments earlier, having the ability to have certain fields available in the data set that on the technology side that could actually be used by different states for different things, but it's one standard. I can't imagine doing a program that I wouldn't want to be part of something that doesn't do that, I guess. Does that make sense? Nora?
Yeah, my question, Shannon, is during the pilots in Oregon, did they test interoperability between Washington and Oregon? And will they be including any of the Washington drivers in the 5,000 that will be in effect in July?
So the answer to your second question is I don't have the slightest idea, but I probably know somebody who does and can get an answer for you. What Oregon did during not its first pilot, but either its second or third, was develop a standard data message that is a very simple, very straightforward list of data elements that are transmitted. And that standard data message is, I did not make up this term, but I love it, technology agnostic. It doesn't matter what technology you're using. It can transmit the data using this format, and that format allows interoperability with whoever else is willing to accept and use that message.
Okay, any other questions on interoperability or comments? Any members of the public?
I would just say that I think it's really important that we do have an interoperable system for the reasons articulated, but also because it would encourage, I think, a more secure, or a system that at least you would have more oversight of, depending on the different jurisdictions that buy into it. So it wouldn't just be reliant upon California to ensure that it was functioning properly and had adequate security standards.
Excellent point. And we'll welcome to the meeting Richard Marcantonio. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair.
You bet. No worries at all. Hope everything's okay. We're glad that you are here. I understand that Councilmember Pam O'Connor is still on her way too. Apparently the traffic was not good for her. All right. So Shannon, anything else on that item?
I don't have anything else on interoperability. It's a very high-level presentation, but at this point we're making very high-level decisions about do you want to try it or not. So we can.
I think you heard yes.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I see a consensus of the committee. Everybody's nodding in the affirmative. All right. Okay.
All right.
Professor.
At some point, the cost of interoperability in terms of reducing the flexibility of what we can do could be perceived as a negative. But until that occurs, I think it's almost no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Supervisor.
Yeah. Are we having discussions with Oregon to include them in our test?
I have not had any discussions with Oregon because we wanted your direction first, but Oregon's conversations can certainly be had and in fairly short order.
I'm with Jim Whitty on a panel on Monday.
And I'm moderating the panel.
And Shannon's
so
moderating
we can make that happen.
Good, excellent, because in Crescent City, Delaware County, there's a tremendous amount of traffic that goes back and forth across the border, mainly because of no sales tax, but also we have a joint powers authority with our airport, and 50% of the ridership, 50% of the license plates in any given time are from Oregon, and so it would be nice to meld those two.
Excellent point. Okay.
Okay, so moving on to topic number 2, it has to do with whether or not to have multiple account managers. This morning, Matthew showed you 2 kind of very high-level system diagrams of what a workflow would look like if there was a single account manager or multiple account managers. One, presumably the single account manager being the state, although that's not absolutely required. It is conceivable that you could outsource to a single company who managed all of the accounts for the state. But most business models for a single account manager do assume that the state is assuming that role. Or having multiple account managers, which would involve contracting with a number of private companies to come in and offer account management services to the various motorists in the state. Different managers might want to provide different operational concepts. So back to the question this morning about, okay, it's a lot of stuff, can you make it simple? It's possible that an account manager could come on board that says, I'm only offering location-based services, and if you want to come with me, this is how it works. And a different one might say, I'm only offering odometer reading-based services, and if you want to come with me. Or an account manager could choose to offer the entire range. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, having just the single and having multiple. In terms of having multiple account managers, it does allow a better testing of the open system concept that we talked about and you approved last month. And so we'll have the opportunity to provide more lessons learned through the pilot so that as you move forward, you know whether that system functioned well and what needs to be improved as you move forward. If it's a single account manager, it's a little bit harder to test that concept. And so you'll have better lessons learned, particularly about how to enforce data reporting, how to enforce privacy protections, how to enforce customer service, how to enforce customer complaints or refusal to pay bills when you have multiple account managers in place. Again, it's a relatively small pilot, relatively short time span, but you might get a sense of how these different scenarios would play out, whereas if you have a single account manager, you're not going to have those opportunities. The second would be that it would provide an opportunity for those account managers who are beginning to enter the market and who have interest in working with California to participate, and for them to get to know the state and for the state to get to know them before any larger sort of a program were to roll out. Because this is a relatively new concept in the U.S., there are a limited number of private account management companies who are involved, but that number is growing. And I know that just in the last couple of weeks, at least two more very large companies have expressed interest in kind of entering this realm. And it would also kind of provide the participants, potentially, the people who volunteer to be in the pilot, with more account management options. If you have a single account manager being the state, you really just for a lot of logistical reasons might be limited to offering one or two options. If you have multiple account managers, again, you may have a manager that only offers one option, but if you have 3 different account managers or 4 different account managers and they're all offering different options, then the drivers, the motorists have a lot more choice. So those are kind of the positives. Also, if you do decide, and it sounds like you have, to test interoperability, this is certainly a mechanism for facilitating that testing. If you use multiple account managers and one or more of them are also working on pilots in other states, then those account managers are the perfect test bed for the interoperability concepts and being able to test various mechanisms for identifying where the revenue should go. Questions so far?
Any questions on that, Professor?
I'm struggling with one issue, and that is that we haven't yet determined the geography of the trial. We haven't determined which classes of vehicles would be included. And it seems to me the two questions are interrelated, that if the trials are geographically concentrated, a single manager might be more cost-effective than multiple managers. If they're dispersed, they might not be. Could you talk a little bit about the interaction between the benefits that you ascribe to multiple account managers and the design of the administration of the program? I'm not ready to say I prefer one or the other, and maybe you can help me do that.
So we're not slated to make formal decisions about who and where until next month. But I would imagine, and I'm not going to speak for anybody else in this room but me, and I change my mind a lot, I would imagine that more than one location would be desirable. I think you want to have a good balance between an urban area and a rural area. I think you probably want to have a good balance between the northern part of the state, Central Valley, and the southern part of the state. I would suspect that you would want to have a balance of some folks who live along the coast, but also some who live along the borders with neighboring states. To me, from the perspective of if you're approaching the pilot with the idea that it's a way of testing out how stuff works, you want as much variety in the participants as you can get. And so I think that with that kind of distribution of the population, having more than one account management service probably does make sense. You're right, in the context of a pilot, it will probably make it more expensive, because in the long run, the idea is that the hope is that the commercial account managers are not charging the state to provide the service. They're recouping their costs through value-added services that they're selling to their customers. For the pilot, you're probably going to have to pay them to participate, or come up with some other sort of arrangement that will probably not be revenue neutral for the state. So the more you have, the more expensive the pilot does become. I think the knowledge, though, that you gain from that in terms of how does it work, how do those options look, how do the systems interact with one another, I think that's probably invaluable.
There's also an issue of economies of scale, that if an account manager who's handling 500 accounts is likely to be more costly per account than one who's handling 15 or 20,000.
Yeah, and at the 5,000 pilot, year-long 5,000 pilot stage, it's per car, it's going to not be inexpensive. But when you start talking about the 40 million cars that eventually could be part of this program, then the economies of scale really take over.
And add in on that, I think the economies of scale issue is never going to play out in the pilot. Obviously that's for the longer term and for the implementation. I see some analogy between the open architecture debate or discussion we had last time and the multiple account managers. I think that, and certainly for the pilot, trying to test systems that are longer term aimed towards efficiency and keeping costs down, but are also maximizing options and also keeping costs lower from a perspective of competition, I think makes a lot of sense.
I think also, and I don't think I put it on any of the slides or the briefing materials, but I talked about it either last month or the month before. Theoretically, one of the reasons to have multiple account managers is because they can provide different technologies and spurring that competition, and also hopefully facilitating innovation, so that we're constantly improving the techniques and methods that are available to people. And that comes through having not just the state running the program, but the private sector involved in different ways. But then also not mandating you must use a private provider. I think the state still has to be involved to make sure that the underbanked and the unbanked are still served somehow.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Richard?
Thank you. Push. I got
You have to hold
All
it
right.
down. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess the other question that's coming to my mind about this, Sharon, is that Shannon.
I've been answering to Sharon since I was 4.
Last month we had, I thought, a very healthy conversation about oversight and the potential for all kinds of abuse that we would want to, and that the design of this on a short time frame might prove challenging to actually build all of that oversight in. Does the I get the advantages of multiple account managers, but does that also complicate the oversight question then?
For the pilot, I think not as much. It's a very small group of people. They're all volunteering to participate in this. So it's not something that's being mandated or they are having to do to comply with the law. I think that longer term, if the idea of the multiple account managers works, and it looks like based on what comes out of the pilot it's a good idea, then the state is in a position to ensure that there is a good structure in place to not only define how data is collected and stored and shared or not shared, but also to enforce. Not enforcement the way we were talking about this morning. We're talking about enforcing reporting and payment, but enforcing with the vendors how they're collecting and storing and reporting and sharing or not sharing that data. But I think you have a little bit more time to make those decisions. And I also think it's probably an academic exercise to begin making those decisions before you even know whether the concept is going to work or not.
Got it.
I sort of, as has been mentioned by other members, I do feel that having multiple account managers would be helpful from a competition point of view, but also because, relatedly, I think it would encourage a more competitive understanding of promoting strong privacy and security standards, but also, having a better sense of what the different options are, and because I believe probably that different entities that provide the service would have different strengths or different ways to provide their own individual features, and we would have a better sense of the spectrum of options for each account manager, which I think would also be beneficial for the consumer in the long run.
I'll also say that we have not shared this with you because it is far from being ready for prime time, but we've started to develop a lot of criteria for evaluating the pilot, and there are a number of very specific elements in there that have to do both with privacy protection but also with data security. And a big part of the idea of the pilot is to test how well these different types of account management scenarios meet the criteria that you establish for protection of personal information, but also for data security. And some of the data security stuff is very straightforward. The ISO standards are out there, and it's really how well do they comply with those. But
okay, any other questions, comments?
so if you did decide to pursue the multiple account management option, there are a few requirements that adds to the work the state has to do in order to get the pilot going. The first is that you would have to, in fact, solicit and contract with multiple account managers. And that's important to know because if this is a direction you want to go in order to start the pilot when the pilot needs to start, this process would need to start fairly soon. Not next month or the month after, but maybe the month after that to make sure everybody was on board and set up in time. The other thing that would need to happen in relatively short order is developing a set of criteria by which to test and certify the account managers to ensure that they are capable of performing the account management activities. Also making sure that they're capable of meeting the personal and privacy information and data security standards that are established, and that they're capable of measuring and reporting the mileage the way they say they can measure and report the mileage. And so which devices are they using, which IT systems are they using, are they using the standard data format that we agree on, and so on. In an operational system, self-certification is a viable option. It's done in many industries across the economy. There's a rigorous audit function that goes into that from the state. And so the other thing that the state would have to make sure was in place both before and during the pilot is the ability to receive the data from the multiple account managers. We're not actually talking about collecting any revenue or transmitting any revenue, so the cash management part doesn't have to be in place for the pilot, but the data transmittal, vehicle X drove 200 miles, that part of it needs to be in place and able to work with data coming from more than one destination.
Excuse me, did I miss something? There's not going to be any cash collection as part of the pilot, even emulation of that?
We can certainly simulate that by sending an invoice and then somebody fills out something without a credit card number and sends something back. But there will be no change of funds, no funds changing hands during part of the pilot. Yeah, and the degree to which you want to simulate the different payment options is really up to your recommendation.
To follow up on that, so will participants know how much more or less they would pay under this under a road charge than a sales tax? Or?
I would suggest that. Yeah. Again, that's kind of your call. I not so long ago designed an invoice for another state of this is what it might look like, and one of the things we did was have a line item that says this is the amount of gas tax you paid based on the mileage you drove and EPA estimates of your mileage. this is the amount of road charge you are being charged, this is the difference between the two. And in fact, under a system, and the pilot would certainly occur under the system where the gas tax is still in place, the invoice really reflects a rebate of the gas tax. So you have to show both and then show either a net balance due or balance to carry forward or refund.
I'm not, there's no way to design a perfect pilot. But having said that, it seems to me if you want to understand attitudes by the motorists and how they respond to different payment systems, you're going to have some sort of payment going on there. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the use of the. Can you play out how is this going to be helpful? I mean, it's going to be helpful in understanding the technology and whether the A can talk to B and whether the state can do a lot of stuff. But when you get down to the actual behavior of the motorist, how's this going to be useful if there's no payment exchange?
So I have 3 responses to that. One is that we are planning to do quite a bit of survey work and focus group work, and I think those questions can come up then. Now, we all know that what people say they want to do and what people then do are not always the same, but that's one way. The other is that I suspect it's within your purview to direct a more rigorous simulated exchange. And Chairman Dapper will correct me if I'm wrong. And then the third is that I keep seeing Norma's hand twitch towards the mic, so I think she might have some input.
I don't believe the legislation gave us the authority to actually collect revenue. And so we, from a department perspective, we were looking at least simulating that process with a bill and a credit or a charge.
A follow-up question, I guess. I mean, did the Oregon pilots, the multiple pilots, did they have an exchange of money? None of them, until this one coming up in July.
Not yet, but this next one they will be starting the cash flow. Yeah.
So all information
It's all
from
been
a
a paper-
financial standpoint was simulated.
It's all been a paper exercise. Of really, Oregon's pilots were very much more concerned with can we get the technology to work in a way that's cost-effective enough that this is a system we can use.
I would just throw out that the whole billing process, timing, frequency, methods, et cetera, and not to gum up the works in any way, shape, or form, but that's a big deal and something that we need to think about as we go forward.
One of the other things that we're doing is we're meeting with other impacted state departments, Board of Equalization, DMV, I don't know, we have a whole list of folks, the ARB folks as well, the technology agency, so we can start talking about those things. What would it take? How would it look differently? So we would have some information to share with this group and down the road with the legislature.
Supervisor.
Would it be possible to set up multi-phases in the program? So the first phase would be sort of a paper phase where we would just keep track accounting-wise, and then the second phase we might implement actual payment options, and then third phase, full
the
use.
legislation does not authorize collection of payment, and so there is that limitation there.
So we need to fully ascertain if the program is going to really work. Otherwise, when it comes time to actually pull the trigger, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm just wondering maybe if we ought to work on some state legislation so that we have a realistic program. I know we've got to work with our legislators to try to get something passed, and that's always problematic. But we want a realistic program in place to really test the market and see how this is going to work.
If I could just chime in, and then Lauren, calling you, the idea that you threw out, remember what our timeline is. We kind of designed this thing. We're going to throw it back over to Norma's shop, the DMV, BOE, you name it. Everybody and their brother is going to be looking at how, and predominantly led by Caltrans, on how this thing will get implemented with these account managers. But, Will, I think, working based on, this group will continue to meet, those are the kind of things legislatively that exactly we could go in and tweak, get somebody to do a spot bill or a bill to actually give the authority so revenues could be collected, or any of the other things that we figure out that make sense or didn't make sense that weren't in the enabling legislation that maybe we should do. Because again, I'll just make this editorial comment real quick. You've got Senator Bell, you've got Assemblymember Fraser, you had Speaker Atkins, and everybody's doing their own interim funding ideas that are going to go from, upwards of 5 years to try to cover the gap that everybody's realized we are in the hole big time when it comes to transportation money. But I've always said those things are stopgap or interim funding mechanisms, and I really think, aside from Norm's comments earlier about maybe just doing a flat fee or something, but that's something the legislature can look at. This is probably going to be the one area that they're going to be looking at to replace the gas tax from a revenue standpoint. And so, Supervisor, I think we'll be able to come back with ideas as we move forward. We won't meet as often, but we'll be able to come up and work through CTC and the Secretary of Transportation and others to try to get the legislation tweaks that we need to make this work. Lauren?
Well, that was the end of that.
All right. Any comments from the public? Norm, come on up. He's got it. Thank you.
I'm not trying to wear out my welcome. I was sitting here listening to this conversation, and there's one benefit to having multiple account managers that wasn't mentioned, and that's the fact that the private sector is very inventive, and if there are multiple managers involved in this pilot, they're going to communicate with each other and figure this out and have as many ideas as you're going to get from this pilot. So I think there's a great synergy there that should not be discounted and say this is too complex to do the first time around, because there's a lot of benefit that could be gained there. And I think on the interoperability, and I can't pronounce that word, sorry, we have a great opportunity to look what's happening in Oregon, because there's a lot of people who live in Vancouver, Washington, and Camas, Washington, and Battleground, Washington, who commute to Portland every day, and there's got to be some sort of communication between those two states and those managers, so to speak, on how they're measuring those miles and who gets what. So I think we have a great opportunity to have that conversation with them and hopefully be one step ahead, not try and reinvent the wheel here ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, I'm going to turn it to Carrie. We're going to go now into the action portion of the meeting, and something new I think she'll explain to you kind of came out of our meeting in Orange County, where we're going to have a little bit of interactive motion preparation on the screen as we go. So, Carrie?
So we've heard from Matthew and Shannon in detail. And so moving forward, we have some key policy decisions, high-level policy decisions that we'd like the TAC to take some action on. Shannon will go through a general discussion, and then we have prepared recommendations. They are just our recommendations. You can change them however you want. They will be posted on the screen, and we can do some live editing to that. So I'll turn it over to Shannon. After Shannon's done, Jeff and I will do our thing with the recommendations.
Okay, so we started with the first question, which was what mileage measurement and reporting methods are most promising moving forward. At this point, if you take all of the various permutations, there's somewhere like 17 different options in front of you by the time you take the, an odometer permit with paper, or an odometer permit linked to your license plate, or a time permit with paper, or a time permit linked to your license plate, those kinds of things. So we want to really begin to narrow those down. And in doing so, answer the second question that has to do with what technologies should be further studied to pursue those measurement and reporting methods. And I want to make it clear that the word technology does include paper windshield permits. Paper is, in fact, one of the universe-changing technologies of all time. The third question that we will be, that Carrie will be proposing an action on is whether the pilot should assess a California road charge on out-of-state vehicles that are driving on California roads. Number 4, should the pilot test interoperability with other states? And the question says considering road charges, but remember, this can be simulated, so even if another pilot isn't active at the time, or if a pilot is active and they're not willing to cooperate, we can do all of this as a simulation to just get a little bit more information about what that might look like. And then the 5th question is whether the pilot should test, a pilot test should offer multiple account managers or a single account manager. One thing I didn't hit on earlier is that this concept of multiple account managers does not preclude the state being an account manager. It could be one of the bunch. And so that's an important, I saw that look. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So.
Okay, so what we've got, and Terry's going to show under the key policy decisions, we'll put up a slide that has that info on it.
Okay, so we're going to tackle these one at a time. The first one is staff recommends, we're working on that. Yeah. Staff recommends the TAC approve the following manual options to be carried forward for further consideration as potential measurement and reporting methods for the pilot program. And please keep in mind, Shannon mentioned this earlier this morning, that these are just our decisions that you're making now. We'll be coming back and readdressing them, so they're not cast in stone. So what we're recommending is carrying forward the time permit, the mileage permit, and the odometer charge, both prepay and post-pay, as moving forward for further evaluation. And then I'll open it up to you for discussion and edit, and we can go ahead and edit this live.
Just, Carrie, if you don't mind, let's go through slides 2 and 3 as well. Just go through everybody so they see everything that we're asking decisions to be made on. So go to the next slide.
All right. So staff recommendation 2 is staff recommends the TAC approve the following technological or automated methods to be carried forward for further consideration as potential measurement and reporting methods for the pilot program. The UBI, the little dongle, the smartphone, and telematics. The third decision that we're going to be asking you to make is staff recommends the TAC approve, include the out-of-state vehicle owners driving on California roads in the pilot program. Number 4, staff recommends the TAC approve the testing of interoperability with other states. And finally, staff recommends the TAC approve the testing of multiple account managers in the pilot program design.
Yeah, I wanted the committee to see all of the recommendations. I mean, I think we got them on the screen, or we got them in advance, but it's important just to see. So go ahead and go back to the first one now. So that way everybody's got an idea of what it is that's before us. And it's consistent with our discussions today, and that's what I wanted you all to see. So let's open it up to this first item, and we can either blow through these real quick or have some additional discussion on the first staff recommendation. Steve?
I had a sort of a clarifying question, I guess. In the first recommendation, you have time, mileage permit. Now, I'm looking also at slide 3 of the policy package that has all these laid out. So you have time, you have mileage, and you have odometer. I'm not seeing, and tell me if I'm wrong, the automated options. Is that intentional, or is that
That's
not?
the second recommendation. So we were doing manual first, and then doing the automated.
Okay, so from slide 3, it's sort of mixing the operational concepts and the technologies. So in other words, you're basically recommending all of the major ones: mileage, odometer, right? An odometer to be dealt with whatever technology, paper or non-paper.
Right,
Is
and
that
these,
correct?
like I said, these are our suggestions. We're open to whatever.
I just want to get a sense, and then so the other one in number 2 picks up those automated ones.
Go to slide 2, Jeff, just so you
Correct.
see that. There it is.
With a few of the technologies picked, I guess maybe one may be omitted, if I'm, well, all of them sort of picked.
We got rid of the engine vibrator.
That's correct. You got rid of the other. Okay, so you're basically recommending without the engine runtime, which we all threw out previously, you're pretty much recommending all of the above.
All the manual options,
Right.
correct.
And just my own quick thoughts since I'm talking, I think that's smart. I think it's good to include as many of the options as possible, as feasible, within the pilot so we can see how some things work or don't work or work in comparison to others. So I think that's good.
Yeah, so again, going back to slide 1, this is pretty much covers the privacy issues, because this is paper. You could pay cash or what have you to get your permits, your stickers, whatever it is. Go to slide 2. This is the technology piece from the plug-in device under the dash on A to a smartphone, as we heard, tied with a Bluetooth, to the in-vehicle telematics, which we'll continue on with the vehicle manufacturer discussion. And then slide 3, well, we can go back to those in a minute, but getting back to those first 2, those are the ones. Dave?
So which one of those technologies would allow for breaking out the use on private roads as opposed to public? Or
The UBI and telematics, and then conceivably you could use a smartphone that has a GPS receiver in it. The challenge with the smartphone is that it has to be turned on, it has to be in the car, and the battery has to be charged.
so all the manual would be ruled out?
There could be a paper-based option for deducting, similar to what you do on your income taxes. There are a lot of different options. You could establish a standard deduction, everybody gets knocked 500 miles off a year, or you could establish a method of claiming deductions based on work activities, land ownership, that sort of thing.
Marty, did you want to say something? Okay. Anybody else? Lawrence?
Yeah, I don't object to moving these all forward, but I do have a question on the study design, and that is that we've got well 6 or some variation of 6 options, and you've got a pilot project of an n equals some number. Are you going to be able to have a robust enough sub-n within each choice to be able to adequately and confidently know what the results are without having to have an enormous main n? So that's one question. And then my second question, and maybe this isn't pertinent to the pilot project, since they'll probably be better informed participants and there'll be a lot of counseling. But I'm concerned generally about having so many options available to motorists that they'll have option paralysis and may not, or it may be just too many systems that the state, which is not that good at systems, may not be able to accommodate. But again, looking at it from the motorist perspective, that there may be too many choices there, and some of them may not be so obviously different as to really be confusing for the poor motorist.
So I'll answer your...
So my question, and so you're probably anticipating me, but I just wanted to finish my thought. Is it wise, I'm not saying not to do it today, but is it wise to have so many options out there when it may, in some significant ways, pollute the study design?
Okay, so I'm going to answer your two-parter in reverse order. The question about having so many different options out there that people get paralysis. I'm that person who's I can't go to the mustard aisle at the grocery store because there are too many kinds of mustard, and I just can't. I freak out, right? So I completely get that. I think that if all of these different options go through the pilot, some are going to be really, really good successes, and some are going to be spectacular failures, and that will give you the information you need to know which to carry forward. And I doubt it will be more than 4 or 5 that leave the pilot. That's just my gut. My crystal ball is frequently cracked, but that's what my gut tells me. as far as the study design part of it, if we leave the volunteers to their own devices to truly choose which option they're going to test, then yes, and I'm more concerned about the manual options. I don't think you would have a lot of people testing time permit. 3 out of, are going to choose that one. I don't think you're going to have a lot of people testing prepay odometer, because why would I pay for something before I used it, which is kind of what the mileage permit is as well. And so I think that as part of the participant recruitment process, that people are recruited to test specific options, not just to come in and test road charge and then you get to choose which one you want to test.
And I think when we do the surveying and the polling, these are, again, areas that through the focus groups, we're going to want to spend some
And we will...
That's getting to my point, which is that maybe you can cull this somewhat by taking a look at what the survey research says.
Right. And we will have those results back for you in time to come back and revisit this list before we move forward into any sort of formal design for the study and recruiting people. And you're free to modify these at this point. It's not going to hurt my feelings. Carrie made the list. So.
Okay, other questions or comments? Got it?
I have an observation on the complexity of the topic. I feel like I'm doing April 15th federal taxes-like activity twice a year instead of one, like standard deduction, Schedule A, B, C, D, all this. Am I reading too much into this, or is this really that complicated?
I think it's a good point. I mean, my personal opinion is if this is going to be complicated, it's dead on arrival. So, I mean, it sounds overly complicated here, overly complicated. But again, we're looking into the weeds for a reason, because we want to see all of the options. But I think the sense I'm hearing from some folks is that this is complicated.
It does sound very complicated. You're looking at every permutation of every option that might be offered right now. And a regular person in the real world is going to have to pick one and go with it. And a lot of the options for the picking one, once they plug something into their car, they don't have to think about it anymore until they get a bill in the mail. And so I agree. Just a side story. Went to dinner in Carmel by the Sea last night. Lovely town. It took 2 people with a lot of formal education, probably 10 minutes to figure out the parking meter. And it was a lesson in how not to design a system, because it was just really rough. So I agree. Simple is important. And we can probably work on coming back with some flowcharts or diagrams or things that explain this a little bit more simply. But, and again, you can kill things right now. And if you decide to bring them back in July, when we revisit this, you can bring them back in July.
Well, I would recommend that we include the items that are on the staff recommendation on the screen. Again, we've said from the beginning, we can get rid of any of these things down the line. And I think if we do include them, they can be included in the surveys and in the public opinion research that we're going to do, both the focus groups and the phone. So, unless there's objection or you want to remove any of these, A, B, or C, I'd like to see a motion to move this item forward so we can keep it in the
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the staff recommendation as presented.
Very good. So we have a motion.
Second.
And there's a second. Any further discussion on it? And I'll just again say that, as we've said from the beginning, there's nothing here that we can't change down the line, because we keep learning more.
It almost begs the question, have you looked at a default program, especially in the manual? In other words, somebody gets a time permit and the time expires, or doesn't take a picture of the odometer. Is there considered a default?
No, I have not. I think that starts to fall into the enforcement arena. Obviously, there's the database that says that this car is aligned with this method, and if you're using the time permit method, it knows when your permit expires, and you could receive a notice that says, "Hey, you've expired, re-up," or "We're going to, repo your car. I don't know what that would look like.
If I may just make one observation as to the idea of a default. In other discussions, the suggestion that the time permit is a default, potentially be a default for people who have failed to select any other things, because the time permit does not require any monitoring of the odometer, and it doesn't require any device be in the vehicle, so it is valid for everybody. So if an individual would fail to choose by a certain date, that individual could be then required to take the time permit for a certain amount of time.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. We'll go then to key policy decision number 2, where the staff recommends the TAC approve the following technological options to be carried forward for further consideration as potential measurement and reporting methods for the pilot program, and that includes the device that plugs into the car, which is A, smartphone, and then vehicle telematics. Any questions or comments on that?
Move the recommendation.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I have two quick questions. Do these both include the no location and the general location within that? Okay. And then the other one is, as we go forward, the UBI thing. I know California insurance regulations and Prop 103 passed by the voters put certain restrictions around that, different from every other state in the country. And I just want to make sure that is being looked at for that UBI option.
It is, and despite the fact that they're called UBIs because they were developed for the insurance industry, the commercial account managers right now that are providing services in this arena are not insurance companies.
And if that's the case, I would recommend we change the terminology.
I would agree.
And get rid of UBI and come up with a different word or descriptor.
We are open to your suggestions.
Well, you guys come back with a recommendation at the next meeting. How's that? You can have an acronym meeting.
So we already know that nobody likes the word dongle.
No, we're not going to use that.
And there are some other words that we'll work on that one.
All right. And I just want to, for the record, the answer to Steve's questions were both yes and the affirmative, since your nods were not audibly recorded, and I know we're taking minutes. So, okay, so we have a motion and a second. Yes, sir. Richard.
This may also be something we come back to, but it seems to me that there's an open question in terms of a later decision about multiple account managers and who might be coming in saying, yes, I do want to pilot one of these, and do we have all of those? But we're saying right now, these are the ones that are going to be on the list for when we get to that point.
That is correct. That is correct. Giving ourselves wiggle room. Okay, any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's go to item number 3 now, and this is the issue we discussed earlier to include out-of-state vehicle owners as part of the pilot driving on California roads. Is there a motion? A motion, and we have a second. Any discussion? Professor.
I would like to see that the TAC allow for the inclusion of out-of-state motorists, but defer later whether that's a good idea or not, depending upon the programmatic design. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't want to see us seeing it as a requirement at this time that we must consider out-of-state motorists.
And I understand your point. And what, again, was your reservation on including out-of-state?
I think that as we move forward, the technology and the geographic design and the selection of classes of vehicles and so forth might make it clumsy to mandate that out-of-state people be included. And I have no objection to us leaving that question open to design architecture toward the potential inclusion. But
well, maybe I'm seeing it differently.
Require the architecture to have out-of-state requirements, vehicles included. I don't think that should be a fundamental requirement of a successful pilot.
Well, I don't have an objection to what you're saying, Marty, but for me, if we're going to create an architecture that's ubiquitous to the United States, which that's at least my personal feeling, I'm not saying anything has to be mandatory, but if we get some out-of-state volunteers that say are, living up in Oregon and they cross into California every day, as we heard earlier, I think it'd be kind of cool to be able to demonstrate that we can partner with another state's program, or we're all, on the same kind of platform. We may be using the same companies, have the same account managers, and it ends up becoming so ubiquitous. It's a lot better than what it is today, because people buy gas in Arizona all day long and drive on the California roads, and California's not getting the
I would welcome the participation of residents of other states. But what I would like not to do is design a system which becomes very expensive because a pilot is being planned that has certain technological characteristics that guarantees that. I'd rather we address such trade-offs later, that's all.
Got it.
If I could comment on this too. I don't know that including out-of-state residents in the pilot is necessarily mandating anything for the future. It is to include them in the study to see how that works or doesn't work, and the complications or lack of complications that might arise. And then with that information, all of that and other recommendations will go, and an evaluation would go forward for an ultimate system that may or may not include that. So I think it's a no-brainer to include that in a pilot with no prejudice as to how that gets implemented later.
And I think just to that point, remember, anything that we are voting on here can come back. Yeah. So we can change. Okay. All right. With that, then, the motion for item 3. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Item 3 passes. We are now down to 4 of 5. And that's the staff recommendation that the Technical Advisory Committee approve the testing of interoperability with other states. So, Marty, this gets back, again, part and parcel to your issue. Are you okay with this so long as we're able to? Okay, I'm getting an affirmative nod. Any other discussion then on item 4? And do we have a motion and a second?
Move the recommendation.
Second.
Okay, a motion from Finnegan and a second from Finnegan. How's that? There's got to be some rule in there that I had to say it just because of that. I normally haven't been saying who makes the motions because they can figure it out, but this time it was Finnegan and Finnegan. Any discussions on item number 4? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. All right, any opposed? Hearing none, therefore the item passes unanimously, and we welcome. I told everybody that you were en route from Washington, D.C., so welcome, Councilmember Pam O'Connor. So we're pretty much a full house with our committee today, with the exception, I think, of Eric. Is there anybody? Who else was missing? And Lee Tien. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you very much for making it, Councilmember. We've been going through a lot of briefings on a lot of issues, and we've narrowed it down to 5 key policy decisions for today, which is on our agenda. We're down to item 5, and that is the recommendation by staff that the TAC approve the testing of multiple account managers in the pilot program design as opposed to just having one. And is there any discussion or motion on that one? Richard?
Yes. I think this is understood, but just to state it explicitly, what I'm understanding about the various benefits of this that were discussed comes with the caveat that some of these account managers or the way they work might turn out to be disasters, and we're not saying that we're not necessarily recommending that the final product should include multiple or yeah.
That is correct. And in fact, it's interesting, and I know I think Jeff was with me, or we were in Washington, D.C. at that, whatever you call that group, BUFA. They got to change their name too, just like that dongle. And it was interesting, the number of companies that were there. Like, I'd never heard of Verizon Telematics before. And then there's Siemens, and there's all these guys, and they all want to bid to be account managers because they want to be able to take that data, or they want to be able to take that sticker that somebody buys and put in their window and remit money to the state that the consumer pays. And it was fascinating to see that. So we'll have to develop standards, and they'll all fit the same ones. It'll be interesting to see how that all works. So, okay, so on the, we didn't get a motion yet. So for number 5.
Make a motion for approval.
All right. Mayor makes the motion. And Supervisor Finnegan, got him, seconds it. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that item carries unanimously, and that is it for our key policy decisions for today. Congratulations on that. I think those are huge. So let's look, as I screen through my screen here, the next item on our agenda, getting us to Norma Ortega, and she's going to kind of talk a little bit about our pilot program communications baseline. And again, if any members of the public have any comments or anything on this, please weigh in. Norma Ortega.
Thank you. So as part of our communication effort, we need to establish a baseline of the public's understanding and attitudes towards road charge. And we will be doing that through a series of phone surveys and focus groups. And I have the pleasure of introducing Sue Midgehall, president of DHM Research, to provide us with more details on how we're going to tackle that particular effort.
Welcome.
There we go. Thank you. All right. We're almost there, you guys. I'm going to get you a little bit closer to the finish. So I know there's been a lot of discussion up to this point on options and technology that will involve the public, and I'm here to talk about how we're going to engage the public in some of these decisions. Okay. I'd like for all of us to just keep in mind that what we're going to do with this initial research, which is an early part of research right now, is to create a baseline, right? We need to really gather where is the public on this issue just generally, and what are the values, the priorities related to transportation compared to some other important issues in the state so that we can provide some context. Okay? So we're going to be able to do this in a couple ways. Okay. The approach is going to look at a statewide survey and a series of focus groups. Okay? And the whole purpose of doing the survey, the key objective, is to create this baseline of opinion on road charging. Along the way, we're also going to want to learn the values that people place on transportation and determine to what extent they're aware, right, and what the priorities are around funding shortfalls. Now, how are we going to do that? Okay. We're proposing talking to 900 residents across the state. These are not just voters. We took very careful consideration to think about all residents in California. If we just talk to voters, we're talking about 60% at best, right, of residents in the area. We're going to miss 40% of the population, and we don't want to do that. And there are some folks that you're going to run into, well, they'll say, this could be a policy decision. We may need to just go to voters. We're going to have about 600 out of those 900 that are registered to vote. So we'll be able to segment then the voters independently of everyone else. 10 minutes is all we're going to have. 10 minutes is all we really get now today with folks on cell phone, which we're going to reach quite a number of people on cell phone. And that's going to be about 25 questions. We will have multi-language interviewers on hand. We're not going to be able to capture every language, but we're going to do our best to accommodate the different languages that we're going to run into with random calls. Okay? And one of the areas that we're proposing is to segment that 900 into some distinct buckets, right? So that when we have the data, we can look at North versus Central Valley versus South, whether we look at urban areas versus rural areas. And all of that we can do on the back end. And we'll be talking with Caltrans and staff on how best to reflect that population.
Quick question on that. You mentioned not to focus exclusively on voters, which obviously makes sense. But at the same time, you are giving some breakouts you'd want to know. Would you also do that for voters, non-voters?
We will. Now, someone might say 900 sample, is that really large enough to look at all these buckets? It's a good start. Even on a national level, about 1,000 sample is pretty typical. And I think for the state of California, 900 is a good starting point. Okay. And we will be able to look at voters separately. So the timeline, over the next month, we're going to be finalizing the list of questions. And again, we're going to be narrowed down to about 25, and that includes demographics. And we'll be fielding the survey in early part of June with results back toward the later part of June. So you'll have preliminary results, maybe hopefully, for the June TAC meeting. Okay? Any questions about the telephone survey before I wrap up with the focus groups?
I'm sorry, Lauren, just one quick question, and I certainly don't want to encourage micromanagement from this group, but will we be able to see the questions? Because I think so many times surveys really ride on the quality and objectivity of the questions.
We are so prepared for survey by committee, but I believe that I don't know if maybe Norma or Gary may have a better response.
I think we can certainly share them and get your input.
Will the survey questions be built upon the number of surveys that have already asked people about road user charges across this country and other countries? There have been something like 60 surveys already, and there's been some reports of the results. So how will these questions be reflective of what's already been learned?
Yeah. Professor, it's highly recommended that we pull some relevant questions that we can track and compare, but I suspect that most of the questions will be new questions that's going to be more relevant to what's going on here. But we will for sure look at some of the national the studies that we've done in Oregon and other states on this to see if there's some that apply to what we're trying to gather here.
Excuse me, you call this a baseline survey. Are there going to be subsequent surveys?
I believe they are. And if you can imagine 25 questions, while that's 10 minutes is a long time to keep somebody on the phone, we're not going to be able to cover everything. And so we'll consider some additional outreach with surveys to get to specific issues.
Is that part of a plan? Is it in the budget?
Our budget has not been approved yet. We have a request in front of the legislature. We have included dollars for this effort.
No, but I'm talking about subsequent surveys.
I wanted to check with Jeff or maybe Gary. I believe we had a post evaluation that we were going to do after the pilot has been completed.
That's correct. Which is a public opinion survey?
I don't know exactly how we're going to treat that. I don't recall the details, but my understanding is we were going to set the baseline, and then once the pilot is concluded, we would go back and do another survey at that time. I don't know the details I don't know if we've gotten that far.
We're still early in the process. So moving to the focus groups. Yes.
I wanted to also express my appreciation that we'll get a chance to give our input on the survey. I wanted to ask more about the targeting languages, which languages. Are there concerns about that the questions will be sort of a little bit technical and hard to translate? And also, will there be any effort to target respondents in disadvantaged communities?
This is going to be we're going to overlay some science, so it will be a random representative study. And so the randomness should be able to get to our communities of color and some of our vulnerable populations or lower income, so consider socioeconomic conditions. But out of 900, right, we won't be able to have enough of an N size, as someone said earlier, to look at each group independently against each other. But we definitely welcome feedback on some of the design and the various groups that are relevant to tech.
You'll be able to pull out in larger buckets which ones are disadvantaged communities, people of color, anything, people of...
That is our goal, yes. That is our goal. Oh, so the question was about how many languages. It's hard to say. We're still early, but we'll definitely take feedback on any comments you have about languages. Spanish for sure, right? But we have so many different languages to consider. And what we're prepared to do is the different households that speak different languages, we'll be prepared to make the callbacks with the appropriate interviewer that speaks that language. So we'll do it on a random basis. Okay, so the focus groups. So the survey, while it creates a baseline and we're able to quantify and say, look, 80% of citizens feel this way, the focus group will say why. Why do they feel that particular way? What are the different motivations, the barriers? What are the values that they associate? And factoring in all of that data, the benefit to TAC then will be, how do we talk about this issue that's going to resonate with the average person? So I think for the average person sitting in here today, it's very technical. Right? And so the messaging that we're going to get out of the focus group will be really helpful as you just go out into the public and talk about road charging. So to do that, we're recommending...
Before you go, let me ask Supervisor Bartlett had a question. Comment.
I think with regard to the focus groups, I think an important component to find out how they feel about road charging, they need to know the options for data collection. I think it's important to incorporate those 6 options that we just approved today, because they may be more inclined or less inclined for road charging if they knew the options for data collection with regard to privacy, pricing, ease of use, and technology, and so on. So I think that's an important component to add into the focus groups.
Well noted, yes.
Okay.
And similarly to the survey, we'd like to give all of you an opportunity to look at the guide for the focus group, which oftentimes is just a very simple 2-page discussion guide to help the moderator lead the conversation. Okay. So the specifics, 4 focus groups is what we're proposing. And some of you may wonder, well, is 4 enough? It's at least a start. And considering budget and scheduling timelines, we're recommending 4 right now. And who then should we pull into those focus groups, which are going to be about 8 to 9 individuals per group. So ultimately, it's not a huge number, but it's enough to have a dynamic conversation. And the recommendation is to have some screening criteria so that we can call and make sure we're getting to the right demographic group. So we have a mix of gender, different ages, different characteristics, right? Whether they're commuters from long distances or urban commuters or non-commuters, what bucket they fall into will be up for discussion, and we'll review that. But one of the things that as a professional I have recommended to staff is that we screen out people who are really against an anti-road charging concept, and also on the other end of the spectrum, people who are really for it. They can, as you can imagine, kind of sidetrack the discussion, and what we really want are the folks who are right in the middle, who oftentimes represent majority of the community. The focus groups are 2 hours long, so we're going to have more time to go into in-depth issues with some complex and more technical discussions. So we'll have opportunities to talk about the different options and see where people go. Okay? And we are going to videotape, so you'll have an opportunity to watch them at home in your pajamas.
Yes, ma'am. On the, back to the survey, you said it was going to be short. It's primarily an attitudinal survey. You're not going to be testing messages in the survey?
We are unlikely going to have time in this initial survey to test messages, but that may be a recommendation that we find from the initial baseline, that we need to get to what those messages are. And the focus groups will help define some of those message points as well.
The reason I ask is that if you did the focus, if you did want to have if you wanted to test the messages in the quantitative survey, then I was just wondering about the order of doing the focus groups after the quantitative survey.
Sure.
But if you're not testing messages, then it probably doesn't.
Yeah.
I assume that the focus groups will have the same attention to diversity that the surveys will?
Our goal always is to try and cover as many buckets and demographics, socioeconomic, different regions. When we are looking at 4 focus groups, we're going to have to narrow things down a bit. So there may be opportunities to do more focus groups along with the survey at a later time, but right now I think the research team is wanting to give you guys the biggest bang for your buck at this point of the phase. Okay, so timeline. The focus groups are going to be conducted in late June, early July, with results back from the focus groups, and of course the survey by the end of July.
Okay, good deal. Any questions on those? Pam?
So be narrow, so you can't have multiple lots of languages. Is one going to be Spanish or all in English?
We would love to get feedback on that as well. So, and the approach today that I'm presenting really is for your consideration. There are just some basic recommendations in terms of sample size and number of groups, but where they're located, the different characteristics we want in the focus group participants, maybe even the different buckets we'd like to pull out of the survey, really up for some discussion.
I thought I heard a recommendation that there would be value to having the focus groups first in comparison with the survey, and I think I agree with that, because I think the probability that you learn something in the focus group through unstructured discussions that would influence the questions is greater than that you learn something from structured questions that you would then use in the focus group. So if it's possible to do the same work, and they're both necessary and important, I think they'd be benefited starting with the focus groups, or at least some of the focus groups.
Professor, I think if we had unlimited time and unlimited budget, I would encourage that we start with qualitative, find out how people, what words do they use, where's the confusion, how should we even frame some of the questions in the survey, and have it more exploratory, and then go into the survey, and then follow that with then focus groups with some of the specifics. What are the different options? What are some of the barriers, the specific motivations, the messaging? My recommendation, though, just considering the budget right now, is to utilize the funds to create a baseline first, and then test some of those barriers and motivations in the survey, along with some of the technical options, and to see where people get hung up, or where actually I'd like to be able to walk out of those focus groups and say, here are some options that you guys just don't even have to consider, because it's really confusing for people and they just don't like it.
Why does doing the structured survey first have budgetary benefits in comparison with doing the focus group first? What are the cost implications of the changing the order? The point is completely reasonable. I just don't understand the link between the cost and the order.
If we do the focus group first, which is definitely an option to doing them, the discussions in the focus group oftentimes will be very general. and it may not lend the specificity that you need to make some decisions.
And I'll jump in. I mean, ideally, we would do it both ways. And that's where the cost implication comes in. I think that you're right. The focus group can inform the survey. But then, as was presented, the focus group could then inform the survey results as to more of the why, is what you were saying. So I think, you know, I'm not an expert, but
And just,
I'll restrain myself and try hard not to micromanage.
we have, I just wanted to clarify something. We have redirected some funds to kickstart the work, the tax work. And so we have limited funds through June. I'm hoping we receive the funding to do the pilot correctly, and I'm hoping that is July 1. We may have some, you know, ability to do some different things, but right now we are really constrained.
And Professor, if we didn't have other research, right, the 60 studies, different studies that you cited, we probably would start with focus groups to give us somewhere to begin. But we actually already have a place that we can start from.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to call on the audience. I know I failed to call on Norm to comment on the last item. So I apologize, Norm, but I'm going to call you forward now.
Yeah, I said I was taking a chance of wearing out my welcome.
Not at all.
Norm Group from Monterey County Farm Bureau, and I did want to make a comment on the decision on the policies. My organization has policy opposing a per mile or on-road tax. However, I think what you're going to find here, and I commend you for making these policy decisions today, is that this pilot is going to get much more complex than any of us ever envisioned, because there are so many issues. And we all know that when you take theories and apply them in the real world, it doesn't always come out the way you intend it to, and there's a lot of unintended consequences that come from that. So this may be a good way to prove out whether or not we can narrow down those choices and whether or not there is a pathway to making this work in the long run. The other comment I wanted to make is that this also affords an opportunity to determine how much of a paradigm shift we need to account for in educating the public. And I assume that you're going to be putting together some sort of educational materials for the pilot group so that they understand all the choices and how it's all going to work and the mechanisms involved. And this may be a good way to test whether or not the message is really reaching the targeted audience first, and then secondly the untargeted audience later as this expands. So I think that was one of the components that I did not hear, is how you're going to reach the pilot group with some sort of educational material and get them to understand the program that you're putting forth. So thank you again for allowing me to make the comment, and I think I'm done for today.
You are more than welcome to come up anytime. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the issues of the surveying and the methodology? Norma, did you want to wrap that up at all? Or?
I believe we're going to come back to the committee and share some of this information with you, the questions, get input. I think ultimately I'm not a surveyor, so we are going to rely on Sue's expertise on what works and what doesn't work. And then certainly more information on the focus groups, and the results will be coming back to this group. So thank you.
Very good. All right, let's move to item 11, and maybe Carrie and or Jeff can go over any remaining action items, our parking lot, and next steps, and any other matters that we have for the May meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Jeff has been diligently typing away all meeting, tracking all the materials and requests for information that you have given to us today. And I'll give it over to Jeff. He'll list them off.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. We have 6 items that we've marked as action items, and they are in no particular order. First of all, we will come back with monthly summaries of the web page views and any comments received and a summary of the responses that came from the TAC or particular members back out to commentators. Second is that we will invite Asha Agrawal to a future TAC meeting, probably after the NCHRP panel is concluded or you've received your report, July or August, and she can synthesize what they found related to public acceptance factors and road use charging. The next one is that we will bring back the results. This might be more of a parking lot item, but we'll bring back the results of Western Road Usage Charge Consortium projects that are completed within calendar year 2015 so that you can take them under consideration as you move forward. The next one, staff will seek potential members, excuse me, from the agricultural industry and explore their participation in the working group. The next one is for privacy. We will have a discussion on privacy beginning next meeting in May, and we'll consider presenting some of that information in some sort of ranking system, present the reporting options that you just adopted, along with some sort of gross ranking or sorting of how they might protect privacy. And then last, we will be sure to find a new name for the UBI devices, and it shall not be a dongle.
Excellent. All right. Sounds good. Any questions? Again, this is just an informational item. Any questions, comments, anything that should be considered that we haven't talked about? Marty?
From another member, one other suggestion that wasn't on your list, and that was to hear back from Oregon specifically on progress, given that they're nearing the implementation date.
They're supposed to start, what, July 1st? Yeah, July 1st. Okay. And as noted, I'll chat with Jim Whitty. Shannon and I will, and get some better feedback for the committee. Okay, public comment. It's that last item, and Debbie Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and committee members.
Microphone. There you go.
Really, I just wanted to thank you all for coming to Monterey County. I'm so glad we had a really intelligent, engaged stakeholder here with Norm Groot of the Farm Bureau. Leave it up to you if you want to volunteer him for more participation. I have to say I'm really appreciate all the time that you all are giving to this issue because, as the chair noted, we have a big hole in the transportation funding picture. I have served for many years on the American Public Works Association Transportation Committee, and I'm now on the Government Affairs Committee. And rest assured that the whole public works profession recognizes that funding is an issue and sees this particular effort as something that has a lot of promise and can help address the issues in terms of making sure that the right amount of money is coming to address the need based on usage. So thank you very much. I wrote up a letter just because I felt like you were here and you asked for stakeholder feedback, but honestly the first three items, funding stability, equity and implementation, and system flexibility, you all are spending a tremendous amount of time delving into these issues in a really technical way, and I sincerely appreciate that. The next three items relate to something that it seems to me you're not even going to get into, and that is how is the money spent. And rest assured that those of you who are really involved in that in the future, regional agencies such as ours will stay involved. And then just finally, I wanted to let you know, I heard a couple of times that there may be some legislative changes needed either to implement the pilot project or as a follow-up activities. I hope you'll stay in touch with regional agencies such as ours because we are standing by to give you support in continuing this research and investigation effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I should also note for the committee, I believe you got two comment letters from the public, one from the California Taxpayers Association. They are a member of the Road Charge Work Group, and then also a member of the public sent in a letter, and I think you all have those as well. Any concluding comments from members of the committee? Seeing none. Carrie, where are we in May? Fresno.
We're in beautiful downtown Fresno.
Beautiful downtown Fresno in May. And, yeah. But, yeah, no, this is definitely not Pam and the boys anymore. We have Lisa, and again, welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for your input today. It was very wonderful.
You're very welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to serving on this committee.
Thank you all. We'll see no other business before us. I will let us know that we're all adjourned. We'll see you in Fresno. Thank you.